So, in my last review I mentioned my dislike for Robert Zemeckis. Since then I've been informed that Monster House was only produced by him. Apart from making me a bit foolish, all that really changes is that now one of the two movies that I like from him don't count anymore.
Also, after a lot of people voiced their surprise at my dislike for Zemeckis, I feel I have to clarify officially that I dislike him for his motion capture films, not for movies like Back to the Future or Who Framed Roger Rabbit. Zemeckis sort of falls under that category of people who really should know better, like the Disney company in the early 2000s when they were making all those god-awful sequels. I dislike Robert Zemeckis now because everything he's done in motion capture does something that I hate in animated movies, and that is that everything to do with characterization and plot is secondary to making the film look good in 3D.
I was asked how I could possibly hate Disney's A Christmas Carol, given that it does follow the initial story, and in some cases even add stuff from the original Charles Dickens novel that other adaptations leave out. And that's true, it does. Well, in order to answer that question, allow me to direct you to the quote that I added at the beginning of this review. How do you louse up A Christmas Carol? Adding unnecessary shit that distracts from the story?
Yeah, a couple people wanted me to compare this to The Polar Express, but I'm not going to, not least because I already had plans for that film. No, in order to get my point across, I feel it would be much better to hold it up to the other versions of the film thus far. A Christmas Carol is my favorite Christmas story, and I don't say that lightly because despite my negative attitude towards a lot of things, I love Christmas. I am rather generous towards a lot of Christmas movies. I can get some enjoyment out of some pretty lousy holiday specials, although these days I tend to make fun of them too, but it's mostly out of love. But this movie, this actually puts me in a bad mood when I watch it, and I'm not saying that as some kind of act to get it worked up for a review. I hate this movie. It kind of makes me sick to my stomach.
But before we get into this, and I'm not going to do a linear review, there wouldn't be much point, it's A Christmas Carol. Let's look at some of the other adaptations.
My favorite two are probably the George C. Scott and Patrick Stewart movies. I have fond memories of both from when I was younger. George C. Scott is just excellent as Scrooge, and I just love Bob Cratchit's reaction to Patrick Stewart at the end of the 1999 film. The 1938 movie I'm less fond of, as it cuts out a lot, but it was made in the 30s, so I'm willing to cut it some slack. On the other hand, the 1951 movie just titled Scrooge with Alastair Sim is pretty damn good, and I think it's supposed to be one of the closest adaptations to the book, despite being a little less well known. I actually saw that version for the first time last year.
I don't deserve to be so happy. I can't help it. I just can't help it.
And of course, there's a ton of other versions, including stuff like A Muppet's Christmas Carol, which is pretty decent. I like Michael Caine as Scrooge, and they did a pretty good job on the ghosts. And then there's the more modern parody Scrooged with Bill Murray, which is hilarious. And that one, the Scrooge character is actually making a TV adaptation of A Christmas Carol, while also going through a similar experience himself. This is also a comedy, so it does stray from the original quite a bit. Most of the films, despite having differences, do share a few things in common, like specific lines and of course the basic structure of the story. And structurally, Disney's A Christmas Carol is basically intact. It even starts with Marley's funeral and a line taken directly from the book, something that most adaptations leave out. No, it's not the story that makes this movie bad, because as it's been proven in many adaptations, it's really hard to muck up A Christmas Carol if you follow the basic plot.
So why does it fail? Well, there are a couple of reasons, so I'll stop wasting time and just get into them. And just to get it out of the way, let's start with the animation itself.
Even more so than live action, animated movies have to work hard at convincing the audience that what they're seeing is real, so that as an audience we can get lost in what we're seeing. We have to be able to see more than the lines on a page or shapes on a computer screen. Animated films need to convince us that the characters we're watching have souls, so that we can become invested and feel sympathetic towards them as we follow them through the story. The characters should come alive on their own, and if it's done well, then we can sometimes forget the voice actor behind them, regardless of whether or not they're a big movie star or someone who's virtually unknown. This is one reason why motion capture fails as a method for animating a full movie. Most of the time you can see the damn actors through the characters, which totally ruins the magic of animation. I don't see Fred here, I see Colin Firth, and while I have nothing against Colin Firth, it's distracting in something like this. And honestly, it's kind of hard not to see Jim Carrey in nearly everything he does. It's less obvious with the Ghost of Christmas Present and the Ghost of Christmas Yet to Come, but for the most part, I can't really forget that it's him.
Another thing they've never really fixed are the eyes in motion capture, which still lack emotion and often appear unfocused. A good example is in this scene. Did you catch that? Here, I'll play it again.
What are you, looking at there, Scrooge? Yeah, that's what I thought. It's hard to convince the audience that the characters on screen are alive when their eyes lack emotion. Is the animation impressive? Well, yeah, the backgrounds are, the detail is, but the more realistic the animation on the characters get, the creepier it is, because it's not quite live action and it isn't really cartoony. So it winds up giving you the impression of lifelessness, like it makes you feel as if something isn't quite right, like some weird subhuman creature is posing as Colin Firth or something. Okay, maybe I'm getting a little carried away, but the fact of the matter is, motion capture really hasn't convinced me that it can be pulled off successfully in an animated feature. The closest anyone's come is The Adventures of Tintin, and honestly, I rented that fairly recently, and at least in my opinion, it doesn't hold up nearly as well outside of theaters. Alright, so animation aside, what else does the movie do to hurt itself? Well, let's talk about character design, mainly with the three ghosts, which are obviously an important part of the film. One thing the movie does that doesn't really bother me is it does take a darker tone in some areas, which is fine. The story lends itself to some morbid stuff. The second and third ghosts are done pretty well. The second ghost has always been my favorite. He's pretty much the same in all adaptations with an exception of Scrooged, and he's the same here too. The Ghost of Christmas Present is always presented as a cheerful, bearded Santa-like figure. He's as good in this as he is in anything, and the send-off with him is kind of creepy, and I like it actually. Kind of sets the tone for the Ghost of Christmas Yet to Come, who is also good in this. I actually rather like the fact that he was just a shadow. It's fitting for the character and pretty eerie. Then there's the Ghost of Christmas Past, who is always a little different in every adaptation. Sometimes a woman, sometimes an effeminate man, and Scrooge a crazy taxi driver. In the original story, this ghost is supposed to be androgynous and of indeterminate age, and wearing a candle flame on its head. And judging by the description given by Dickens, probably freaking terrifying. But in this movie, he's a joke. In all honesty, it's probably the closest any adaptation gets to the Ghost of Christmas Past, as described by Charles Dickens, but the design is just...
You, the spirit whose coming was foretold to me?
I am the ghost of Christmas past.
Yeah, the whole scene in the past is kind of spoiled for me, to be honest, between the creepy design they use for his sister and the dancing that defies gravity, and that fucking ghost. Jim Carrey just can't help himself, can he? The whole thing kind of winds up irritating to me. But the main thing that hurts the movie is the 3D bullshit. This film is full of 3D bullshit.
I like to think of myself as a fair person. Not a word.
I saw this movie on the big screen and it was kind of cool. The flying scenes were effective, and that one scene in the film where the floor goes see-through with the Ghost of Christmas Present was impressive. In 3D. On the big screen. Even then, while I was watching it, I couldn't help but think how poorly this would translate to DVD. And for those of you who aren't convinced and think I'm being unfair, this is a movie where somewhere on a script are the words, Scrooge takes the candle stopper and snuffs out the Ghost of Christmas Past, only to blast off into space and across the moon. Also ridiculous is the fact that the scenes that are supposed to carry the most weight, those scenes with the Ghost of Christmas Yet to Come, Scrooge is shrunk down to about 6 inches, running through pipes and talking with a chipmunk voice. That's not something added to enhance the story, because it doesn't. It takes away from the part of the story that should be played entirely serious. This was added for more 3D bullshit, and even there it fails, because even in theaters, this scene was fucking stupid. While it does do a pretty decent job of not only following the story as presented in other adaptations, but also adding things from the book that other versions miss, Disney's A Christmas Carol suffers from a lot of gimmicky bullshit. The reason this story is good is because even though it gets syrupy at times, at its essence it captures the Christmas spirit in its most pure and innocent form, while also occasionally going to dark places. So for the most part, following the story works as long as you don't stray too far from the basic story structure. Look at a Muppets Christmas Carol, for instance. Muppets or not, they know when to play it straight.
When love is gone, when love is gone.
The problem with this movie is that there's so much gimmicky bullshit that it keeps it from feeling genuine, and therefore lacks the sincerity present in other versions. Forget factual accuracy, facts don't mean much if you can't capture the correct feeling. Because in a Christmas movie, at least a good Christmas movie, emotional payoff is important. I don't feel emotionally satisfied by this movie, and just so you can feel how I feel right now, take a look at this.
Come to Mummy! Get him, darling! Come to Mummy! Come here!
Get him!
You're welcome for those nightmares. Join me next time for my last review before Christmas and my last review of the year. I'm the Animated Heroine, thanks for watching.